All right. Well, I guess we can start this grand experiment. Working title. I forgot it actually. I had a logo and everything. Spoken Freely. Spoken Freely, the podcast about anything and everything sports in the state of Oklahoma, specifically to Southwest Oklahoma, but we branch out. I'm your host, Glen Brockenbush, and joining me on our maiden voyage, I can't think of anybody better, honestly. You know him from your TV screens. He is the face of the sports department at KSWO, the ABC affiliate in Lawton-Fort Sill. He is Kyle Weatherly. Kyle, how you doing tonight, man?
Doing outstanding. I'm just glad to be finally talking some sports after, 4.5 months.
I could not agree more, and we have plenty of sports to talk about. I guess one of the first things we can talk about is what you and I have been trying to talk about for about 4 months, and really only has started to take shape within the past 2 to 3 weeks. What high school and college football might look like. The OSSAA is obviously kind of put the onus on a lot of the school districts, had said, really, it's up to you guys how you want to judge this, how you want to play this out. And, I've had some conversations with Gary Dees, the athletic director for Lawton Public Schools, as I'm sure you probably have as well. A lot of things still up in the air, but right now, what's your kind of take on all this?
I think it's still a million for everybody, isn't it? I mean, at this point, we're just about a week from starting practice, and still nobody knows for sure whether we're going to have high school football or not. I mean, you mentioned the OSSAA, and they're kind of leaving it up to the school districts, and I think that has to go back to what their board of directors decided all those months ago about guidelines for summer activities. I understood letting the individual districts kind of deciding their own guidelines for off-season activities. I do feel like at some point somebody from up top is going to need to start making some guidelines for how to handle things once we get into season. It just, to me, that makes more sense. I think you have to have some sort of uniformity across the board. How are we going to handle things? And at this point, I think we are going to have at least a start of a season. As far as how far into the season we're going to get, I'm not sure. I think, like you, my confidence goes up and down almost on a daily basis right now because the news changes basically on a basis. You just look at the college football. A couple of weeks ago, you had OU moving up their first game an extra week, so they had a little bit more time. And now, at this point, it doesn't look like they're going to have any non-conference games, or maybe one in the Big 12, just like all the other conferences.
No, completely. You're completely right, and I think that and I'm sure I've talked about it in my columns and stuff. Not to call out on the OSSAA because they there's no blueprint for this. They didn't know what to expect from this. Guys like Mr. Jackson, David Jackson had no idea that this was necessarily going to happen, and even if he did, at those first 3 months, you have no idea what's going to happen going forward. And I think he's probably handled it about as well as anybody could. But I agree. I think it's going to be, at first the onus is going to be on the school districts. But I do believe that somebody at some point, if you are a governing body, at some point you got to govern. And I think that they have to, they're going to be called upon to make some decisions down the road. When that is, who knows? I do think we will start a high school football season on that last Friday of August. How far it goes, who knows? I think his talk about this is more about participation, less about championships, I think says a lot. That they're not necessarily banking on having state finals or a full playoff system. So we'll have to, we know about as much as anybody else does probably, which is very little in that we don't know what's going to happen. And it's all going to kind of be a week-by-week basis. Whereas college football, like you said, it looked pretty good for OU for a while, and I think it says a lot. They haven't had any positive tests in however many number of weeks. I think that bubble format is working. But then you hear some of these other conferences having they're having second guesses from their players, from their participants, and then that audio that kind of got leaked this past weekend, it's pretty damning stuff. And I think it's going to be kind of a toss-up as to what happens with the college football season. What about you?
Absolutely. College football changes really by the day. I mean, you're getting something new. I mean, tomorrow we're expecting the Big 12 to come out and release something, whether it's going to be just conference games only or one non-conference game plus conference games. You know, who knows what the direction is going to be. I think everybody at this point is sticking basically to a conference schedule. And then at that point, what do you do with the playoff system? I mean, you're going to have to probably expand it if you're going to have a true championship. Are you going to have a true championship this year? And does that even matter this year? It's going to be different for sure. Going back to the high school level a little bit, I mean, the OSSAA, I mean, yeah, there's not a blueprint for them. And especially when you look out there, all the school systems that are doing things differently just from each other in the state of Oklahoma, I mean, it's kind of hard to set, guidelines right now when you have some schools going virtual learning and some schools starting in schools. So it's definitely going to be an interesting, I would say, next 2 weeks. I think you're going to find out a ton in the next 2 weeks.
Could not agree more. And I think that, like you said, whether we have a champion or not in college, and I think this also ties into the high school, kind of what I said earlier about David Jackson's quote about championships, is kind of whether it be the 99 NBA season or really any strike shortened year in pro sports, this is probably going to have an asterisk next to it. Whether that's fair or not, it's going to be kind of a weird year for everybody. And the sad part is this might not be the only season that happens. We could see this happen for another year. So I'm not a doctor by any means. So it's scary, obviously, on a health concern basis, but also from a sports fan standpoint, if you're trying to return to any sense of normalcy, best of luck, because it's you might have sports back, but don't get too attached, I guess, is kind of the message.
Yeah, I think you're really obviously right now with Major League Baseball. I mean, they're having all kinds of trouble, and they're not in a bubble in any sort of way. And I think that's what you're looking at as far as high schools in the state of Oklahoma. They're not in any sort of bubble. I mean, yeah, they're to their little towns or cities, but then they're going to have to branch out at some point. And what happens then? And are their testing protocols going to be the same as some of the teams they're playing? What happens when maybe a couple of guys on their team come down with the virus? It's going to happen. There's just no way around it. It's going to happen, especially once school starts. There's no way to avoid people coming down with it. Maybe some small outbreaks among teams and schools as well. That's the key right now, is how are you going to handle that? Until they figure that out, I mean, really even talking about a season, I think, is pointless. And let's be honest, we all want a season, but at some point we have to figure out how we're going to have that season.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm sure, without even naming names, you and I have both had schools within our coverage area that have had positive tests, multiple schools, and we've seen several of them handle it differently. We've had some of them say, absolutely, we're shutting down our team programs for 14 days. We've had the others say we're going to keep an eye on it. I mean, you can look at CDC guidelines, but again, guidelines are just that. They're just guidelines. And so until there is a kind of in stone law or ruling, there's really nothing you can do to make certain schools do certain things. And I feel like that's kind of the OSSAA, being almost libertarian in that, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to play the role of bad guy. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens going forward and how different areas react differently. I was up in the Tulsa area not long ago, and some friends of mine that work in the sports media business up there, they were asking me what color level we were in terms of tests. And I said I had no idea. And they looked at me funny. Well, it turns out up in the Tulsa area, that's like a hot button topic that everybody knows. And so, obviously a lot of teams from this area would not play Tulsa schools until maybe the playoffs most of the time. But I do believe it was Cash or somebody is playing Tulsa Central, or was scheduled to play Tulsa Central as a non-district game. I have no idea if that's going to happen now. And, if it does, you obviously have two school districts that are in very different places in terms of number of cases. So it's going to be really interesting. And like you said, we all want this to happen. And whether it does or not, it's really remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think thing is you can have all the guidelines, all the protocols in place as well, but it doesn't matter until that first person or that first outbreak happens. It's going to be your reaction then. I mean, whether your guidelines are in place or not, we've seen, especially over the last few weeks, the emotional reaction is such a big part of this. And you're going to have parents, you're going to have administrators and teachers, and everybody's going to be more and more concerned as this kind of stuff happens. I think the main thing that I'm concerned about is maybe not so much the kids, the players. I think we've seen that, they're healthy enough that it's not going to affect them, or at least most of them, too badly. The people that I'm more concerned with are maybe your school teachers or your coaches, especially those older coaches. I mean, we've already seen some stuff today about a coach in our area that's not doing too well after coming down with COVID. And that's the scary part is, most people it doesn't really affect or doesn't affect too badly, but there are those people out there that it does some serious damage to.
Yeah, it's obviously something that we're keeping an eye on at least one coach in our coverage area that, we're keeping in our thoughts in terms of, his health. And it is something where, again, I mentioned recently I was out of town and I actually was I was visiting an old college professor of mine, and, he was talking about, once we get kids on campus, if you go to Norman or Stillwater, you get 20,000, 30,000 kids on campus. Stuff is going to happen, but really, like you said, the people that it might affect the most are the teachers, are the professors, are the coaches. And I know my old professor specifically said, if I have to teach 1 hour a day, guess what? I'm teaching my hour and I'm going home. I'm getting away from campus immediately, because he's, in his 60s or 70s and doesn't want this to happen to him. And it is going to be very interesting to see where, those notions that, well, this really only affects people who have this condition, or really only affects people at this age. A, that's not always 100% accurate, but B, that doesn't mean that we need to be willing to put everybody at risk. And just because 16, 17-year-olds are not as at risk doesn't mean the coaches coaching them are not. And if they're exposed to those things, it's going to be very, very risky. And again, that also ties into the college ranks, where you have a lot of coaches who, who have been exposed to this. And, we found out today yet another, and again, not necessarily always COVID related, but, we had a second member of the Sooner family die today, or this past weekend, and Ricky Dixon, as well as John Blake. And whether those are always, COVID related or not, the point is those guys were young enough that they should and could be still living. And you have plenty of coaches that are, of ages that you're like, man, that could really, really affect somebody. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens with those high school and college teams as practices begin, like you touched on.
We've mentioned that, he's had some really good success with their numbers the last couple of weeks, but to me, it's almost like that's great. But the real test is when the rest of the students come on campus, because as you mentioned, I mean, there's only so much isolation you can have with your team when you have all those other students back on campus. I mean, they are, after all, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds. I mean, at some point they're going to want to live life, and that's when the real test comes.
Yeah, you can only keep teenagers and early 20-somethings from socializing for so long. And yeah, you're going to be a kid. You're going to have fun. You're going to do stuff. And it's going to be very interesting, not necessarily in a great way, but interesting to see how that happens. As football does come back, assuming we have a season, college football, a lot of expectations for both Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Obviously, the Sooners started back, this past week in training, and everything I've heard, things went swimmingly, and players are appearing to do the right things, say the right things, everything's going swimmingly. I don't necessarily want to ask how long do you expect this to happen, but like you said, once kids come on campus, we'll know more. Do you think there's a whole lot to read into these first 2 to 3 weeks?
No. I mean, I think it's obviously a positive sign that they've gone through their off-season activities and, a few days of training and practices where nobody's tested positive just yet. But again, it doesn't matter until the other students come on campus and you're waiting to see that larger pool of students interact with each other, how much interaction there is, what can you do then? I will say it's great to see just how seriously, the Sooners are taking this. I mean, obviously Lincoln Riley, he held off as long as he really could and had his players come back later than a lot of the teams around the country did. They had a few tests, right off the bat with people returning to campus. Since then, it's gone down to zero the last few testing periods they've done. So obviously, if you're an OU fan, that's a positive sign. At OSU, I mean, really, it's been kind of strangely quiet. I mean, we obviously, that first week when they came back, they had a few tests and had some quarantine going on, and really haven't heard much since then.
No, we really haven't, and that is something that is going to be interesting to track because obviously, if there's one word to describe OSU this past summer, quiet was not it. And so we kind of expected a little something more, I guess. Maybe that is a sign that Mike Gundy is trying to kind of stay out of the spotlight. Who knows if that means, more players have been equal. We have no idea. We don't know what we don't know. And at this point, I think wild speculation is really fruitless because we don't know. And it is going to be very interesting how, OSU, but also the rest of the Big 12 really handles this because obviously they were not the only school that had players test positive. We saw some of the other schools have multiple cases. And then when you have schools like Clemson who are, thought to be one of the national championship favorites, had whatever it was, 30-something kids within their athletic program or within their football program test positive. That's, that obviously was probably going to be a red flag, and I'm sure it's gotten better since then, but we have no clue. And it's going to be really interesting to see what college football looks like in 3 to 4 weeks if we have it. And that's, tastes like vinegar coming out of my mouth as a massive college football fan, but as a realist, we have no clue.
Yeah, I think the folks in Stillwater are probably happy that things have been quiet for
right.
Certainly, this COVID stuff, not the only challenges that colleges and really everywhere that's been facing with country. I mean, obviously the Black Lives Matter subject has been a huge topic of discussion across the country, especially on college campuses. I mean, obviously it's been big at Oklahoma State. It's been big at Texas, where you've seen a lot of changes happen. Right. Texas A&M, Clemson, a lot of places has really been, a main focus for a lot of these student athletes returning to campus. Obviously, the Mike Gundy, Chuba Hubbard stuff was a huge, huge story, not only here in the state of Oklahoma, but nationally. You, as an Oklahoma State grad, I mean, what do you think? Is this something that a team can kind of, bond together and can make you stronger, or is this something that rips the locker room apart, you think?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think that it is I think you hit the nail on the head. It is kind of a coin flip thing where I feel like, and I wrote about this whenever it first happened, is this is going to be probably the most critical juncture of the Mike Gundy era. This might not be as viral or as meme-worthy as I'm a Man, I'm 40, but this might be the defining moment of his tenure there. Because it is such a make or break moment, I feel like you have one of two options where you can really learn to know your players better, build relationships, build a camaraderie, and say, I am with you guys, and I'm not saying you have to agree on everything politically. I'm just saying, just understand where they're even coming from. Or you can just say, I am who I am, whatever. And I feel like he did take, at least publicly, the right path initially. We will see if that holds up. If you're a kid on that team, if you're somebody, especially like a Chuba Hubbard, if you're somebody like a Tylan Wallace or Spencer Sanders, how do you respond? Like, how are you expected to go into the huddle and just play like nothing has happened for the past 5 months? that's a little foolish in my thoughts. It's going to be very interesting to see how the team responds. How Mike Gundy responds is one thing. How the team responds, I think, will make or break the season, and maybe ultimately Gundy's legacy. We have no clue. And I know I maybe got some flack from some OSU people, which I thought was hilarious as an OSU alum. I'm like, I'm not allowed to show bias, but I'm basically on your side. I want this to go well for not just for the school, but for the state and for the conference. But we have no clue. We have, we're not on the inside. We have no idea what the mindset or the rapport is, and it's really going to depend on those kids, which you and I we're both 20, 21-year-old, once upon a time. You can be very fickle and you can be very easily persuaded by certain things. I have no idea how they're going to react. It's very unpredictable, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see. And as if all that wasn't enough, you have a freaking pandemic on top of it. That's wild. And that's why it's almost a fool's errand to really predict what OSU will look like. At best, I feel like they could be one of the top 2 teams in the Big 12 playing in Jerry World in December. At worst, I think this could all fall apart. But again, we have no idea where they stand. So it's going to be very interesting. But that's where I see it right now is I understand Stillwater and Oklahoma in general are not the most, shall we say, diverse of places, but you still, I feel like, need to be on the same level as your constituents and as the people that you're trying to lead.
You touched on it a little bit there. I mean, obviously we live in a very red state. The fan reaction will be conservative and say it's been mixed to some of the stuff that's gone on here. That's kind of one thing that I'm kind of anxious to see is if we do have fans in the stands, this year, and there's a game at Pickens Stadium and they choose to kneel for the national. Well, I guess they're not out there for the national anthem, but if
I guess not, yeah.
Protest, some sort of visual protest that goes on. What's that reaction in Boone Pickens Stadium going to look like, and how are these players going to react to that?
That is, again, another very explosive question, very loaded question. As I said, I was in Stillwater not long ago, met with some old professors, and yeah, I was at one particular store that was selling shirts that had like Gundy's silhouette, had the mullet silhouette on there, and I'm wondering, I'm like, how big of sellers are these nowadays? Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute, to some people these are as hot as ever, and you really have no idea. And while I was out there, I saw guys selling, political merchandise, Republican political merchandise on the side of the road. So it's, it is what it is. Stillwater's going to Stillwater, but I do feel like there are a lot of people that are absolutely kind of joining with Chuba Hubbard and guys like that as to say, hey, it isn't okay to treat your players like pieces of meat. It's not okay to treat them lesser than yourself. And again, I'm not there. I have no idea. But it is, those were some of the rumors we had heard. And a lot of things that I've heard through the grapevine kind of pointed toward that being possibly true. And, Mike Gundy can win as many games as possible. I don't know, for me as an alum, I would love for him to have great relationships with his players and become a father figure and all that stuff from a Disney movie, but I don't know if that's going to be the reality. And if you continue to win, are fans going to care? And that's really going to be the, if you go whatever 10-2 or 11-1 this year, are people really going to be that upset? I have no clue. And again, I say those numbers as if we're going to have a 12-game season. It looks like we probably won't, but expectations are very high for OSU, not just on the football field, but I think people will have eyeballs on what's going to happen socially and with the climate there, just amongst students and higher ups, and what's going to happen.
Yeah, here's everything. That's certainly been the case for Mike Gundy there. I know he's not had the greatest relationship with the Oklahoma State administration over the years. That's been widely publicized. I think one of the strangest things that have come out, strange revelations to come out of all this has just been how distant he's been with his players. I mean, you hear Mike Gundy speak with the media, and gosh, he's a personable guy. I mean, he's fun to listen to. He's great to interact with in those sessions. It's just hard to believe that, he's actually kind of more of a private guy that kind of likes to have his distance and have his space, even within his own program.
And you would think for a guy who, has pulled in some very highly thought of recruits, but also, and again, I think this probably is a testament to his staff as well that he's had throughout the years. Outside of maybe a guy like your old boy Bill Snyder, there's not many guys in the Big 12 that have really done more with as little sometimes. I mean, yes, he's gotten 4-star, maybe even a 5-star here and there, but oftentimes he'll get a 3-star offensive lineman and turn into an all Big 12 player. I don't know how you do that without good communication skills or without good recruiting or without a good rapport. Again, I'm not there. I have no clue. But, to see some of these players kind of pile on, that tells me either A, some of these alums that played at OSU 5 to 10 years ago didn't have a good relationship with them, or B, they're just taking cheap shots because they feel like it. And who knows? And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because you saw a lot of piling on when that first came out. And then when players were saying, oh, we're willing to work things out, you didn't hear as much from some of those other players. So it's very interesting to see how things work out. Again, like you said, does winning really cure everything? I feel like if they have as good a season as many people think they could, I think a lot of people will be back on Mike Gundy's side. I don't think you'll hear any talk about him getting fired. Whether that's right or not, it's really not for me to say. I don't know if that's really, you obviously want your coach to be a good guy, but it's kind of like, I forget who it was one time said, I don't hire a plumber because he's a good person. I just want him to fix my pipes. And you hire him to be a good role model, sure, but you hired him to win football games.
Yeah, if you're in Oklahoma, you have to hope that this whole thing just kind of brings the program closer together and makes it better than ever. Because, I mean, obviously the tools are there this year for it to be a special year in Stillwater if we do get to play some football. In Norman, it could be the same way. I mean, there's be nothing that I would love more than to see, Bedlam Part 2 in a Big 12 championship game. Just selfishly, I just think that would be awesome. I mean, we got to see, OU Texas Part 2 a couple of years ago. That was an electric atmosphere. And I think OU OSU going again in round 2 would just be outstanding, even if it's at Jerry World or somewhere else. I mean, who knows what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and I don't know if that really dawned on me till just recently. Like you said, very, we as, journalists or media members, we have a job to cover the games, but we're fans too. And that dawned on me recently, like, oh my gosh, could this really happen? Could Oklahoma State and Oklahoma end up at Jerry World for the Big 12 championship? Could I actually get to cover it? And I think my brain shut down for a quick second, just trying to process that, because Bedlam has always felt like something that every now and then gripped the nation a little bit. But I feel like if you played on like a truly national stage like that, the rest of the nation would have no other choice than to really embrace this rivalry, and which has always kind of played second, if not third fiddle amongst a lot of the rivalries in the Big 12, with Baylor being as good as they have been the past 5 to 10 years. And obviously Texas and OU is probably going to be the best rivalry in this conference just about forever. But then Baylor and TCU had really good bouts, and Texas and TCU as well, Texas and Texas Tech. This rivalry, obviously, as somebody who has seen it in person more than a half dozen times or whatever, I mean, it holds a special place in my heart, and I think it holds a special place in the heart of most Oklahomans. And whether we get to see it twice or just once this year, I think it's going to be really special.
Yeah, I hope. And for us, selfishly, as media members, I hope we get a chance to cover it.
Right.
We don't know, even if there is a season, if we'll be able to cover the games in person, or if we're going to have to be, just like everybody else, watching it back at home and just seeing it from afar. But hopefully we'll get a chance to be in the stadiums and and be able to bring you some of those sights and sounds and some of those comments, and not just have it like we are right now, which I'm afraid we are, is everything's probably going to be virtual. I mean, you're seeing that with the NBA right now. Obviously, they're in a bubble, but there's only a select few media members covering the NBA restart right now. And I think that you're seeing some of that coverage kind of suffer because of it. I mean, it's still a cool setup what they've got going on down there, but I just wish there was more local interaction with a team like the Thunder.
Well, doggone it, Weatherly, you saw right through me and saw where I was going with this. But yeah, kind of talking about the NBA kind of transitioning. You know, the Thunder played for the first time, I guess it was yesterday, and we're seeing some games happen right now. And as somebody who enjoys the NBA but doesn't normally watch a ton of regular season games, I have been absolutely glued to this, and I don't know why. I think part of it is because, A, we obviously know how much these games mean because we're only about 8 left. B, I am infatuated with the idea of becoming a virtual fan. I don't know how you go about doing that, but I want to do that because, A, I think it would be awesome. B, I think it would scare the Jesus out of my wife to see a hologram of me on television. I want to get that done. But also, you know, if you're an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, how can you not enjoy what you saw on Saturday? My goodness. I mean, the defense was there. The offense was there. You had, 5 guys scoring double figures. I mean, there's so much to like about this team right now. What was your biggest takeaway from Saturday?
I tell you what, one thing, just glad to have basketball back. Just glad to be able to sit on the couch and turn it on the TV and actually be able to catch some live NBA action. I didn't realize how much I've missed it the last 4.5 months, but gosh, I did. You know, it was kind of a sloppy start, but the one thing that stuck out to me was that defense. I mean, the Thunder, they were a very good defensive team before the break, but gosh, they didn't miss a beat on the defensive end. Offensively, it was a little bit sluggish at times, but they shot the lights out of the ball, especially in that first half. Just the thing that I love watching about this team is just there's so many options. It's not, you know, depending on one guy to get everything going. Don't get me wrong, Chris Paul is, you know, kind of the operator of this team, and he has his hands on everything. But it definitely feels like if he's not got it going, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can step it up. Even you saw Steven Adams the other night. I mean, he was – it may not be the prettiest offensive game for him, but, you know, he gets the job done. Some of those push shots, it's not so much hook shots. It's more push shots at the rim, and they don't look pretty, but they get the job done. And he had a heck of a ball game. And seeing some of the defense played by Lou Dort, even seeing Andre Robertson back in the game, there's just a lot of things about this team that you got to like and admire and see a real team effort, real team basketball with the Thunder right now.
No, completely agree. And as I was thinking about it, and I know, you know, obviously people from New Zealand, you know, nicknamed, you know, Kiwis, and much like the fruit, it's not always going to be the most appealing to the eye, Steven Adams' game, but it is, man, he gets the job done, and he's amusing as heck. Obviously, he's a fan favorite, and obviously somebody like myself who, you know, not born and raised in Oklahoma, but is somebody who has lived in this state for, you know, 7+ years, I've kind of learned to really, I've really enjoyed watching this team, maybe as much, if not more, than any other Thunder team that I've seen. That included teams that played for titles. And I think part of it is because of how unexpected it's been. Somebody recently who's not a Thunder fan asked me about, well, okay, well, who are the Thunder's big guys? I haven't kept track of them. Who are the big guys? I go, well, obviously they have Chris Paul. They have Steven Adams. But after that, if you haven't followed this team, how many people nationally who are just casual NBA fans know about SGA, know about Lou Dort, know about Darius Baisley or Ferguson or, you know, Dennis Schroeder, who quite honestly prior to the break, you heard Doris Burke talking about it during the game on ESPN, and she said, you know, I forget who the other player was, but they were saying, you know, he probably would have finished second prior to the break in their 6th Man of the Year voting. I mean, he's right up there. Guy averaging as many points as he is this season coming off the bench, he really has kind of revitalized his career, and also hasn't been pushy about getting minutes, which is not something you see from a lot of guys who are former starters. If you're going to go to the bench A lot of guys see that as a demotion. He just saw it as whatever way I can help the team. And I think Billy Donovan really has to get a lot of credit for how this team has played. It's going to be very interesting how they go forward. Obviously the win over the Jazz, everything that meant, especially given the last time they were supposed to play the Jazz, that meant so much. But really going forward, it's going to be very interesting how they play against the Nuggets, how they play against, other teams in the, in the hunt, in what this team looks like going forward.
Certainly maybe the most unexpected Thunder season since maybe, when Westbrook and Durant were really getting going the first time they made the playoffs, and they kind of took it to the Lakers a little bit that one year. They lost in the first round, but they kind of showed that potential. Obviously it's not really the same deal here because you're not sure what this team's going to look like next year, but just as far as expectations go, it's been a fun season because it's already a team that's exceeded all expectations of where they were going and where they could possibly go from here. As far as their ceiling goes, I mean, man, I don't know. I mean, the Western Conference is as tough as it's ever been. You look at it, Lakers on top. I mean, obviously they're dealing with a kind of a shorthanded team right now with some guys opting out and Rajon Rondo going down with an injury. The Clippers look like they're the real deal. I mean, Paul George has been spectacular in this restart. The Nuggets, who knows what they're going to look like. I mean, Portland, Utah, Houston. This could be set up for Houston too. You never know with Harden and Westbrook playing as well as they are, what they're going to look like come playoff time. It's just so much fun. It's such a unique atmosphere there. I can't wait to see it when the playoffs happen. What's that intensity going to look like? Is there going to be anything different about it when the playoffs start?
No, you hit the nail on the head. It's I think a lot of people, and again, only time will tell, but I think a lot of people would, obviously point at, especially kids of the 90s would point to the 90s as, NBA's golden era, or people of the 80s would point. I don't know if this is a golden era per se, but as you said, this Western Conference top to bottom, or, 1 through 8, really, really interesting. I was watching that Rockets Mavericks game the other night. I stayed up for that mess of an end of a game where, and I say mess as somebody who grew up in the Dallas area, obviously you blow an 8-point lead and it ends up going to overtime. But, for guys like Robert Covington and Daniel House to step up for Houston, Dallas is not a team to be counted out either, obviously with Porzingis and Luka Doncic. But, yeah, if you're – as of right now, where the standings are right now, if the Jazz and Thunder meet up again, because they're only a half game apart, if you're a Jazz fan, do you really feel that confident about playing against them? I mean, obviously you need to get somebody like Jokic or not Jokic. My gosh, why am I forgetting his name? They're without somebody the other night, were they not?
Was it Bogdanovic?
Bogdanovic, yes. If you're without Bogdanovic, that's obviously a huge blow, but still that team did not look the same at all. And, again, I don't know if we can expect the Thunder to look that good all the time, and especially if you were going to face the almighty LeBron-led Lakers in the second round. Who knows what happens there? But if nothing else, I think this is a real breath of fresh air, not just for Thunder fans, but for sports fans. Like you said, the last time I got to sit down and watch a sport that wasn't golf or NASCAR and just relax, I think that was the thing about today was I sat down and watched probably a good 2 hours of golf. And I have not done that maybe since I lived with my parents, because golf has not always been my favorite sport, but it just felt good to sit down and watch sports. And I think that it does seem like the NBA has the right idea with the bubble. They, with a few things here and there, maybe Lou Williams getting a little too adventurous. Other than that, you really haven't had a lot of, red flags from the bubble. And maybe that should be, I don't know if other leagues can replicate that per se, but I think that's probably going to be the blueprint that most people point to and say, they made it work. Where can we, how can we do something like that?
Must have been some damn good weather.
Gosh, man, I like some chicken wings, but I mean, holy cow, that's a high price to pay. I hope he tipped well. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Lou Williams returns, because he's obviously a critical part of that team. And we're hearing stories about Dennis. I believe it was Dennis Schroeder, whose wife is supposed to give birth soon. And if you leave the bubble, you go out. It is really something like out of a movie, like Bubble Boy or something like that, where it's like, if you leave this sphere, how do you can you really be uncontaminated when you come back? It's going to be very interesting.
Not only that, you have people in one of the states that's getting impacted the most right now.
Right.
This is happening in Florida. You got this bubble in Florida where we're seeing these cases just skyrocket by the day. It's really amazing that they've been able to have the success that they've had so far. It will be fun to see if they can continue to keep this up. I'm not sure it's any other sport can really replicate this, though. You look at football, baseball, the number, just the sheer number of players, the sheer number of teams that they've got. I don't think you can make that work in a bubble. Obviously, this is unique to basketball, and they're taking advantage of it.
No, completely agree. It is almost like an AAU tournament in that, you have all these teams there, and there's a reason why football teams don't play, 3 games in 5 days, that sort of thing. It's just a different toll on the body and just a different atmosphere. I think that basketball, I mean, this is really uniquely tailored, I feel like, to the NBA. And I feel like, if nothing else, Adam Silver has to be feeling pretty good about his stance as among the best commissioners in terms of pro sports. Obviously looking a little rosier than Rob Manfred right now, but I think that this is, I don't know if this will necessarily be his, all-time legacy. It's way too early to tell, but the way that these things are handled is really going to be written on a lot of guys' foreheads for a long time in terms of, oh, he's the one that let this happen, or he's the one who didn't let this happen. And I think so far, nothing but thumbs up for the NBA.
Yeah, Major League Baseball, on the other hand, 1 to 10, maybe you would say they've got about a 3.5 right now.
Yeah, I was going to say 4, and that's being generous.
Hopefully they can get their act together. I'm not the biggest baseball guy, but gosh, I know a lot of people out there that are. And so hopefully they can get it together, kind of tight.
It was all going so smoothly, wasn't it? After about 2 days, and then it all just
almost got through that first weekend.
So quickly, it just tanked. Well, we hope to continue this being a thing going forward. And Kyle, we will obviously have you on for future episodes. Good friend of the show, good friend of the paper. Kyle, continue to take care of yourself, and let's keep our fingers crossed for football.
You too, man. Hopefully I'll see you out there at some games the next couple of weeks.
All right. Well, for SpOKen Freely, we will see you later.